Hi, my name's Tosh from Widge Productions, and today I'm down at Sonicstate having a look at the Universal Audio 610 Preamp plugin collection. This is a pair of preamp models, and it's one of the more recent additions to Universal Audio's already pretty extensive library of analog emulation plugins. They've looked very closely at the circuitry and created software models of the complete signal path. So this includes the input stage and the output stage, which have individual valve amplifiers in them, and the EQ, which is a feedback style design which interacts with the output stage. Like I said before, you've got two flavours in the plugin collection. You've got the 610A, which is based on a vintage model, and the 610B, which is based on hardware that you can buy off the shelf today, such as in the 6176, which is a preamp and compressor. The 610A is based specifically on a preamp module taken from what's known as the green board, which was a piece of hardware used by Wally Hyder and had a very varied life. I think it ended up in Neil Young's studio, but a lot of very famous people have recorded through there. Talking about Elvis, Duke Ellington, Frank Sinatra. And it's associated with a signature sound of that era, a very, very classic sounding piece of equipment. Right, so I've had a chance to play around with these plugins, been using them in mixes and also for a bit of tracking. So today I'm going to go through some example usages of it, a couple of mix examples, and also we've got a guitar here and a bass here, and we'll show some using the plugins live whilst tracking. Okay, so if we pull up the plugin windows, I've got an example of the 610A over here, which is this slightly vintage looking green plugin, and then the 610B over here. Now essentially, very similar set of controls. You've got your input gain. So this controls the gain for the input valve stage. Then you've got a 2-band EQ. On the 610A, you've got basically fixed high and low shelf filters. The low frequency one is about 100 Hz, and the high frequency one is set to 10 kHz. And you've got fixed plus minus 6 dB, and on the high frequency +3, +6, -6. Over on the 610B, you've got a bit more flexibility. It's still stage levels of EQ, but you've also got this selector here to choose the center frequency. Giving you a bit more range, from 4.5 to 10K at the top end, 70 to 200 at the bottom end. Also, the input stage has a bit more variation in terms of gain levels. We can go to -10 to +10 in 5 decibel steps. Next bank of controls are the mic, line selector, 20 dB pad and phase switches. Over on the 610B, the only difference is we have this little impedance select here. So this allows you to match the impedance of the preamp to your microphone. Now, guideline says that you should set the impedance to the closest match to the microphone, but the reality is the setting will change the colour and sound of the microphone, so it's really down to your ear and your taste. The big knob controls the output stage gain. And between the small input stage and the output stage, you can balance off 2 different tube circuits, and you get a fair amount of variation in terms of colour, if you like, or tonal variation by matching those two. Finally, you've got this output trim control. Now this doesn't feature in the original hardware, it's purely a digital signal level control, so it means you can use your input and output gains to dial in the tone you want, and then you can purely trim the level using this output control. Okay, so before we get stuck into some mix and tracking examples, I thought it might be quite interesting to just have a look at what happens to a signal when it flows through one of these. So in an ideal world, that involves a simple amplification process without changing the signal. But the reality is these systems are made up of components that, when they're pushed slightly, start to behave in non-linear ways. And it's this non-linearity that introduces distortion, and that's what we sort of term warmth or colour or analog feel. All that boils down to really is how these components are affecting the signal as it flows through the system. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at a signal going through one of these preamps, just to get an idea of what that really means. So if I put the tone on, there you go, you can hear a nice 1 kilohertz sine wave, and there you can see it on the scope. 1 kilohertz, nothing else. Now, as we start to turn up the signal level, the main peak goes up as we expect, but also we start seeing some little peaks building up over here. And as the level goes up higher, those peaks become more pronounced. And if you notice, there are multiples of the original frequency. This is known as harmonic distortion. I'll just turn that down a minute. Harmonic distortion is one of the factors that gives, or this old tube transformer analog gear, its characteristic sound. It's shaping the signal, adding harmonics at higher frequencies. Now, we're just working with a simple square wave here, but if you can imagine a complex musical signal comprising lots of different frequencies, different amplitudes, the additional distortion pattern is going to be quite complex. So in practice, what does this actually mean? In extreme form, nasty distortion, but in subtle forms, it changes the colour and the timbre of the signal going through it. UA have updated the console application, so it allows you to put these plugins as special preamp inserts and make use of the Unison technology, which essentially allows a two-way communication between the Apollo hardware and the plugin. So you can make adjustments on the screen to the plugin settings, and some of those will actually change hardware values within the Apollo and vice versa. So for example, channel 1 here, I've inserted a 610B plugin and these special preamp slots here, and if you look, you've got the option to put the A, B. Also the API Vision channel strip, if you have that, has this capability too. And what this effectively does is turns the already very nice Apollo stock preamps into emulation preamps. So we then have integrated control of the gain staging, we've got EQ emulation in there, and we also have some hardware control over things like the impedance of the microphone input. So if we go over to the control panel, if you hold down the control button, you'll notice the channel number starts flashing. That now means you're in Unison mode, where you can control the plugin from the hardware. So essentially what this does is the control knob is now set to vary the gain. If you can see on screen, that's controlling the input stage gain. If I press it again, the outer ring changes colour, and now it's tracking the output gain. Press it one more time, and I can do the digital output trim. So this is a very nice feature because it means you can dial in the tone you want straight from the hardware. Also, if I go into the software and click the impedance selector here, it's actually switching the hardware inside there and changing the impedance to match the microphone. Things like the pad, fully interactive as well, and the phase switch, you can see toggling the hardware or in software, they're all working seamlessly. So we're going to look at a few examples now of using these plugins in the mix. If we go over here, we've got a mix I've been working on for a band called Timber Terror. This is their cover of Ordinary People done in a salsa vein. So taking a look at the bridge section, I've got the horns running through an example of the 610A. And I'm using it to dirty them up a little bit. You can hear if I push it, we're getting very, very distorted. Round about here, I kind of like what it's doing. I'm also using the EQ. If I take it right down, you can see that it's a simple EQ, but it's actually very musical. I can add weight at the bottom, take off the brightness of the horns if I want to, but I quite like where it was there. Just switching it in and out so you get a comparison. That's with it off. section, that's with it in. It's a subtle sort of warming and brightening, but what it's bringing to the table is offering me some nice sculpting choices for the tone. If we now go over to the percussion section, again I'm using a 610A, and we've got here a full Latin percussion section. Again, the EQ is very useful here, very powerful in sculpting. I'll turn it up to 6 dB. You can hear that top end, or the high frequency instruments really standing out. Or I can take them right down. The bottom end is really enhanced with that 100 Hz shelf. Probably a bit too much for this mix. I can make it less dirty by taking down the output stage. Or I can bring that slight grittiness back in by bringing the output stage back up. Now, it's worth mentioning now that, as I said before, the tonal variety comes from balancing the input stage here with the output stage. So, for example, I push the input gain up, so I'm driving the input stage harder, and bring down the output stage. I get a slightly different variation in the effect. It's worth noting also that, like the analog gear, you have to be very careful of your gain staging with this. So one thing it took a bit of getting used to was that any overs on your input signal into there will start causing the input stage to clip. So for example, here we can see the signal going in is now going over 0, and that's starting to cause input clipping. Even when I turn down the input gain stage, I'm still getting a bit of clipping. So you have to be aware that you need to look more closely at your signal path and be prepared to balance it a bit more. So now we're going to try quite a different example. A guy and a guitar, a couple of room mics and close mics on the instrument and the vocal. If you look at my mix panel, we've got 610 preamps, the LA2A model Studer tapes. On the output I'm using Fairchild, plate emulation reverb. First of all, if I switch off the preamps, I'm using the 610A preamps here. Again, for that vintage vibe. So if we switch it on. My favorite stone is broken in two. So you can see a very spacious, gorgeous sounding guitar, great voice, and lovely room vibe. So if I now bring in the preamp plugins, and just so you know, on the vocal, I'm not adding any EQ, I'm just using a bit of tube gain. On the guitar, I've added a bit of high and low frequency, plus obviously the tube gain. And on the room mics, I added quite a bit of top end and bottom end there. And the difference? My favorite stone is broken. So you can hear that contrast. Let's take them out. Dead in the park, next to you. My widest thought. It brings a certain warmth and richness out to the overall mix, which is a very lovely thing. Another example at the other end of the spectrum, this stuff would be interesting to see how it works on something more modern, some dance music. So I've thrown together a quick cheesy two-step example using some of the loops in Logic, and stuck some of the 610A preamps on each track, and we can see the flavour it brings to those. So if we listen to the drum track, haven't got the preamp in at the moment. If I bring it on, you can hear that EQ. Also, if you really want to go extreme, you got some nice options there. If we listen to the organ track, again using that bottom end EQ to add some depth. There's a nice kind of warmth to that sound there. Let's have a listen to this little acoustic guitar sample. So I'm using that high-end EQ to brighten it up. You can also add a bit of tube gain. Bounce that down. Starting to distort down at the bottom end there. Then we've got a little vocal sample here as well. I'm using the 610B here on this. Again, we've got the nice EQ adding a bit of air. Getting a bit too much distortion there. If we take that in and out. So taking it out, a bit of a thinner sound, bring it in, we've got a bit more depth and warmth overall. So in the context, if I take all those preamps out, and have a listen to a bit of the vocals. Now bring them in. Bit of a rough and ready example, but you can hear very clearly that depth and warmth that these plugins are bringing to that mix. So those were some examples of using the 610 plugins in the mix. Now the other side of the coin is using them for tracking, which is part of the excitement of these plugins. Yeah, so moving on to another application, we've got a nice little Fender Music Master bass here. That's without. Now bring it in. So I've added a bit of bass EQ there. I can add some top end. Or darken the sound up further. Again, add a bit more tube gain to it. And then we compensate for that by bringing down the volume and the output. If we push that even harder. Take down the output again. Quite a nice dirty tone there. We can go obviously the other way. There's quite a thick tone there. Just take it out a minute so we can. Put it back in. Now obviously you can spend a long time playing around with the various combinations of input and output gain and EQ, but the point is you've got quite a range of variety there in terms of sculpting the sound, and depending on what you're doing, what you're recording, it just gives you a nice palette to work with. So to summarise, we've seen the 610 A and B preamps, emulations used in the mix and used live tracking. And really what we're talking about here is tonal shaping, colour, subtle to fairly non-subtle distortion if you want it. Is it worth the upgrade, especially for Apollo owners who've already got the 610B? It might be thinking, what's the point in the 610A? I have to say that I was initially like that when I started looking at these, but you may have noticed in the examples that I've given you, I've been mainly using the 610A, which for good reason, and that there's something about the tone of that plugin that I really like and what it brings to the mix. A 610B is good, it's useful. I find it a bit surgical, to be honest, but the 610A has a little magic to it. And that's really what I've been appreciating in the mixes that I've done so far with it. So to recap, the UA 610 Tube Preamp and EQ collection is now available at the UAD store. I think it's priced $149 if you're an Apollo owner and you already have the 610B. That's an upgrade price. Or if you're using satellite or one of the PCI cards, the whole suite, that's the 610A and B, is $299. Okay, so the big question is, would I buy this? Initially, if you'd asked me that when I first got these and had a quick play, I'd probably say no. But now, after spending a few weeks really working with them and getting to know them, it's a definite yes. I really love what it brings to the mix and the power and flexibility that it offers. Okay, so that's about it for today. Thanks for listening, and catch you on the next review.